everybody, my name is Janelle Orsino, aka Enthusiast Adventurer, and this is the first episode of the Adventurers Audio Podcast. Today, I want to sit down and talk to you guys about how I got started and where my passion for the outdoors comes from. When I was young, I grew up in the suburbs of New Jersey, pretty close to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I kind of had the best of both worlds growing up. We lived in the suburbs, but we were kind of close to woods. So I grew up a suburban kid, and the street that I grew up on was full of kids close to and around my age. And we just grew up outside playing, no matter what it was. Every day, from the moment I woke up, I just wanted to go hang out and play and do whatever with all of the kids on the street. I believe there were 14 of us, and there was never a dull moment, and everybody was into different things, but we all got along pretty collectively and very well, and it was just a great environment to grow up in. We had this field across the street from me, and we would play all different types of games. And when you're a kid, your imagination just runs wild. So I hung out with all the guys on my street and all the girls. Every activity was different. Some of us would go swim in the pool, some of us would go play on the trampoline, some of us would go on the field. And every day it was a different adventure for me, but I loved growing up outside. We also had a batting cages facility right down the street from us. So sometimes we would go hit some balls in the cages and go hang out with the owner. We knew him very well. He was a family friend. And we just knew everybody on the street. Everybody was family. Going in and out of different people's houses was normal. If my parents didn't see me outside playing on the street, they knew that I was either in somebody's house playing over in the yard or over by the pool. It didn't matter. We were a very tight knit group and we had a really awesome little community growing up. So my summers were spent either playing outside on the street with the kids, or they were also spent down at the campground or down by Wildwood, New Jersey. And obviously, as a kid, running around on the beach, playing in the waves, catching hermit crabs and sand crabs and different types of fish and jetty fishing and crabbing. We did all of those fun activities, jet skiing and all of this awesome stuff during the summer weekends. So we would go down to the campground and we would go to the beach in the morning and then come back in the afternoon, either swim in the lake or hang out by the pool, and then split all of our activities throughout the campground. There was hiking trails and biking trails. There was a double-sided lake that we could fish on, which I did a lot of as a kid, catching frogs and turtles and looking for snakes and just all of the cool stuff that you did down at the campground and down by the shore. That was where I spent probably 50% of my time. The other half of the time, we were up at our mountain house, or our mountain property, should I say, up in the hills and the mountains of Pennsylvania. And all of the brothers, my dad and my two uncles, all of their kids, plus my grandfather, would go up for the weekends and we would all split the land and play around and camp in our little camping trailers. And I just remember running through the woods with my cousins, climbing trees, catching frogs, and finding newts and salamanders, and shooting BB guns, spotlighting for deer at night, or watching the birds and catching dragonflies and moths and butterflies and doing all the cool stuff you did as a kid, making fires, learning how to make fire, being able to sustain the fire, and just learning what the outdoors was like. It was the best of both worlds. I had an amazing childhood. I had a great community on the street that I lived, and then I had a split community between my shore life and the beach life side and then the mountain side. So I fell in love with the outdoors growing up in that environment. So, from a very young age, I was exposed to the outdoors and I fell in love with it. And that passion has only ever grown for me and it has become my happy place and it has become my place of business and the place where I just feel alive. I think a lot of us can relate to those feelings. And if you are somebody who loves the outdoors, Please join me in these episodes. We are going to cover so many different topics. I love anything and everything to do with the outdoors and adventures and exploring, hiking, camping, fishing, hunting, airsoft, survival, bushcraft. There's off-roading, road trips, just anything and everything. The possibilities are quite literally endless, and I just want to share my experiences with you guys, communicate with you guys, teach you guys some things, maybe inspire you to get out in the wilderness and reconnect, maybe get together with family and reconnect, or just explore. I believe that we were put on this earth to explore and live your life. And I think experiences override any monetary valued item. I would rather spend my money on experiences than things. Don't get me wrong, I do have a lot of things and gear, but if I had to put my money on it, or if I had to put my lifeline on it, adventures and experiences are what I would rather have over any monetary valued item. So, with all of that being said, let's talk a little bit about my hobbies. Fishing has always been in my blood, and it has always been in my life. My dad is a huge fisherman. I get a lot of my inspiration and my talents through him. He had me and my brother out there when we were young, and it has stuck all the way through, and now fishing and hunting are in my blood. My dad doesn't discriminate between saltwater and freshwater, although we both get very motion sick, so you won't catch me on the saltwater side so much. I'm more of a freshwater girl, but either way, catching fish of any species is something that I absolutely love and am passionate about. Some of my first memories of fishing, the first one that I have that I can tell you kind of vividly, is of one where my uncle and I went fishing on a rainy day at a lake that was a couple blocks down the road from my grandmother's house. So it was raining, and I just remember putting on my jacket and my little boots and having him have the rods and the equipment, and we walked down to the lake. We set up our rods, and I'm sitting there, well, standing there on the bank, holding my rod, just looking around. He's to the left of me, and I just feel my line pulling. And I am holding on to this rod, and I look down, and I look at my boots, and they're sliding towards the water. This fish was pulling my feet towards the water. And I don't remember, I think I said, Uncle Andrew, I think I have one. And he turned and he looked at me, and I'm reeling, and he's like, yeah, like reel it in. You got this. Don't let go. And reeling it in on this tiny little rod. I remember him standing behind me and helping me hold the rod and reeling it in. And I remember him landing it for me and pulling it up on the bank. I was about 6 or 7 at the time, and the fish was longer than I was. Literally, the fish was longer than me. We didn't have a scale, we didn't have a measuring tape of any sort, but we took a picture. It exists somewhere in his house, and it's me with my rod and my boots and my little raincoat smiling with this carp laid next to me on the ground, and this thing was massive. It was so big and so beautiful, and I remember just being like, "Whoa, I can't believe I did that." That was so exciting and amazing, and it's this core memory that I have of me and him fishing together and having that experience. Being out in the weather, I didn't care that it was raining. I had the biggest smile on my face, and catching that fish and taking that picture and having that moment with him was one of the best feelings in the world. Fast forward, fishing is still in my life, but I'm, bobber fishing here and there, and I'm in elementary school, and my brother and I go to the same lake, and he's throwing this fire tiger, really bright, uh, green, chartreuse, orange spinnerbait, and he's casting by the bank, and boom, this fish hits. And he's freaking out. It's like a 3-pound largemouth, which is huge and insane. And it's just me and him, and we don't know what to do. And he lands it, and he calls my dad. He's like, Dad, you have to come. You have to come get this fish. Oh my God, I can't believe this. What do we do? What do we do? And he's down the road, and he's like, "All right, we'll be there in a minute." And my dad was like, "Just put it back in the water, make sure it stays alive." And we're just looking at this massive largemouth with this big old belly. She was beautiful. We couldn't believe that this happened, and it's just the two of us. He drops the fish back down in the water, holding it by the line, and of course the fish spits the hook. He knew better. I knew nothing at the time. And at that moment, my dad and everybody in the family had pulled up to be like, "Where's the fish?" And had literally just got off the hook. Of course, my dad was like, "Why wouldn't you put it in the water, like holding it by its mouth, not by the line?" And my brother was like, "I don't know, I just panicked." And nobody really believes us of how big that fish was. Me and him both know that that was a big, big old largemouth. But it's kind of this fairy tale, wise tale that we have, and nobody believes how big that fish was. And everybody has a story like that. I'm sure you can relate if you've ever been fishing. She was a big one. That's the second kind of core memory that I have of fishing. When I grew up, it was all bank fishing. It was all bank fishing. The only time we ever took a boat out, we had this little, uh, I believe it's a 12-foot, 12-foot John boat. It's a little aluminum boat. And of course, my dad would take me and my brother fishing every opening day of trout. We would load the boat up. I feel like we would get up at like 4 o'clock in the morning. It was still pitch black out. Me and my brother would go, we'd have our little gear, and we'd fall asleep in the truck. My dad would load everything up. We would get out on the water in our little aluminum boat, me in the front, my brother in the middle, my dad in the back, man in the trolling motor. We would putt past everybody with all the little mist and the dew on the grass, and the water was kind of foggy. We would get to the very front of the lake, where there was always a game warden on the bank. He always would check our licenses, make sure we had our licenses, everything was legal. We would anchor up. We would get so excited. I hated touching mealworms to this day. I do not like touching mealworms. They're not my favorite thing in the world to handle. I know I'm like 29 years old, but there's something about them that's just creepy. So as a kid, my dad would do it for us. He would rig all of our rods. We each had 2 rods. So we would have 6 rods on the boat, 2 each. One would be on our left and one would be on our right. And when he would say, "Okay, it's time to go, first cast, go for it," we would cast our lines out and we would sit and wait and we would both stare at our bobbers. And the trout would come in waves. The school would come by and tear us up. Boom, one bobber would drop. I would set the hook. I'd be reeling the fish in. The next one would drop. My brother would set the hook. He's got a fish. My dad's trying to land the fish while his bobber goes down. It was absolutely chaos. And we were landing these really nice stocked trouts, and then it would go dead quiet because the school would come through and feed and then circle back out. And then we would have a few minutes to collect ourselves, get our gear back ready, put the fish on the stringer, cast our lines back out, and wait again. And that cycle would go on for a couple hours, and we would have some low points, some boring points, some snack points, and then bam, the action would start up again. It was great. As the years have gone on, that fishing location hasn't produced like it used to, but those memories, like, they're embedded in the back of my brain, and I just remember being like, I can't wait to do this forever. I love fishing. Now, one of the first memories of myself catching a bass was actually right around this freshwater tournament that our town would have at that same little lake by my grandmother's house. All of my fishing pretty much growing up was by this little pond. There was actually 2 of them within a block and a half of each other, and we would go back and forth and fish them because they were close enough to my grandmom's house where we could walk down and do our thing and come back up, and they had fish in them. So the town would have this little tournament and they would have these prizes that you could win. You'd have a little raffle ticket with your number, and when your number got called, you would go pick up your prize. So that year, I got this red 2-piece eagle claw rod. It had this really cool, almost like a brass coin on the handle of the rod. I'll never forget it. I love that rod. I recently just got rid of it because I couldn't find the top half of it. But I won the rod and the reel combo. And my cousin Nick and I and my brother went fishing at the second pond. It's a little bit bigger for some bass. And at the time, I was throwing a beetle spin. I really didn't know any techniques, and there was a lot of lily pads where we were, so I didn't want to get snagged on too many things. But I would cast at the edge of the lily pads from the bank as far as I could, would whip that lure all the way across. And I remember reeling it in, and then boom, largemouth. Now, we're not talking anything big. This thing was probably under a pound, but I caught 3 of them, and I outfished my brother and my cousin that day. And I just remember, like, impressing them a little bit, which was awesome, and catching fish on my own, like, for the first time by myself. I did not touch the fish. I had them unhook it for me. That's a story for another time. But it was a really awesome feeling. And I also that day found this tackle box of gear and these little hemostat pliers that I have to this day. I love them. They're like a little 8-inch, metal, kind of like trout pliers that have the cutters on them. They're one of my favorite pliers to use for panfish, for trout, for smaller fish. But I found this whole tackle box of gear and I started using that stuff. Somebody must have left it at the lake, and I was young enough to be like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. There's nobody here to claim it. So I took it. Do I recommend that? Not really. But I did, and I used all of that gear to catch fish. And that was the first time that I kind of became a little independent in figuring out at least one successful way for me to fish for bass. I wasn't relying on anybody at the time. I was still very new to it. I was probably like 14 years old, and I still didn't really know a lot of what I was doing, but that's kind of the first light bulb that went off in my head. Okay, everybody, this is the part of the podcast for when we do have sponsors, their ads will go in here. For now, it's just me talking. This is self-produced, but in the future, when we do have sponsors, their ads will go in this little segment right here. But for now, let's get back to the episode. Now, let's talk about my favorite place on probably planet Earth, Lake Champlain in Vermont. My dad has been going to the same cabins since the early 90s. And when I was a baby, when I was like 4 months old, my parents took me on my first ever trip to Vermont. Obviously, I don't remember it because I was a baby, but there's this really cute picture of me on a blanket in front of the cottages and the lake behind me. Now, let's fast forward about 15 years. The first trip that I go on with my dad and my brother, we're renting a little aluminum boat with this kicker motor on it. We can't go very fast. We can't go very far. The only rod and reel setup that I have was gifted to me by my dad. It was one of his old setups. I'll never forget this day. We're sitting in this aluminum boat. The sun is out. It's hot. We're not catching anything. We're using these small jigs with grubs on the bottom. I don't really know how to fish it. All I know is I've been told, slowly pop your lure off the bottom, reel in the slack, wait a couple seconds, and repeat. Mind you, the only fishing that I really know how to do is cast and reel. Whether that's a rooster tail, a grub, or a beetle spin, I don't really know much else. I'm very new, and I don't have a lot of techniques under my belt yet. So we're sitting there in the boat. I lift my rod, twitch it, and I'm like, dang it, I'm snagged. I'm like, Dad, I'm snagged. And I reel in and I yank it. And I go, I'm snagged. And the rod doubles down. And this fish starts fighting. I'm like, oh, I'm not snagged. I think it's a fish. And I remember him being like, okay, just fight it. It's a smallmouth. It's smallmouth. And I'm fighting this fish and I'm reeling it in and I'm just straight reeling and I'm, reeling down and pulling up like you would if you were a saltwater angler. And this fish jumps out of the water. I'm like, holy crap. My brother's freaking out. And I get it to the boat and my dad grabs it. I don't think we had a net at the time, so he just kind of lifts it himself and he pulls this like 3-pound, beautiful dark smallmouth out of the water. And my brother's like, oh, good job. And we high five and we clap. And my dad takes a picture and I have that picture to this day. And I remember being like, oh, like that was cool. Like, oh my gosh, like what? I thought I was snagged. And he was like, yep, smallmouth will do that. They're tricky, but they fight hard and they live behind the rocks. And they pop out and they grab their prey and this, that, and the other. That was the first smallmouth I ever caught, was in Vermont on Lake Champlain. And I remember just being like, whoa, like, I want to do that again. That year, I only ever had one snag that I snapped off in the rocks. Yes, for a whole 7 days, I only lost one lure because I was more patient and more naive and not as bold with my casting. But that started it. And every year since, we go to Vermont, early spring, kind of right around the spawn, for a whole week. It's a family trip that we take, and it has most of all of my favorite memories. I broke my personal best there twice, 3 times, all on the same day. I have it documented on film. It is on my YouTube channel. If you want to check that out, go to Enthusiast Adventure on YouTube. I believe it was like day 3 of our trip, and I broke my personal best. I broke smallmouth and largemouth. The coolest part about that day was I'm finally understanding how to fish. I'm finally understanding some techniques. I'm learning, different lures to throw, how to throw them, when to throw them. And this year was the biggest year for me. At the time, my biggest smallmouth was 3 pounds, 9 ounces. And I believe I caught that fish on a drop shot. This time, my second favorite way to fish, jigging off the bottom with a crawl. I'm throwing a yum crawl in my favorite color on our hand-poured lead jigs, and thump of my rod, just boom. I pull back. Wasn't a good hook set, so I reel down and I yank that rod straight across my torso, across my body, up to the left, and I rip that hook in that fish's mouth. That fish isn't going anywhere. And these fish were still kind of lethargic, so they weren't jumping yet, but he was dogging me and digging me, and he was pulling drag. And I'm freaking out, and our buddy Billy's on the boat, and he's like, let me grab that. I'm like, no, let my dad land the fish. Let my dad. It's huge, so big. This fish never jumped out of the water. It just dug me down and dug me down. We got it to the boat, and I saw how big it was, and that thing took back off and was like, nope, I don't want to be anywhere near that thing. I fought him, I get him in the boat, and it is a slob of a smallmouth. The stomach on this fish, the gut, was ridiculous. It was huge. So huge. I'm freaking out, and I'm like lisping and stuttering on my words, and I'm just like, oh my God, this thing's big. Billy puts it on the scale, holds it up, and he says 412. I lost my mind. I start jumping. I'm turning around. I'm like smacking my dad. And like my hands are flailing. That was my dad's record. That was my dad's personal best for the longest time, was 4 pounds, 12 ounces. To have the same personal best as my dad was like huge for me. And to have broken 3 pounds, 3 pounds for me for where I grew up is a big fish. Some places it might not be, but here in New Jersey, that's a big fish. And I just my mind was blown. I was shaking. I took so many pictures. She had such this big, beautiful gut on her, and the release was one of the most beautiful parts. I'm holding this fish by the mouth, and I turn her to let her go, and I let my hand go. And she swims forward and does like a full 180. And she looks at the boat, and she pauses for a second, and then she turns back down and goes down. And it was one of those moments where, like, when that fish turned and kind of looked at the boat, I don't know, it was almost like an outer body experience. It was really awesome and really cool, and I feel like the stars kind of aligned that day. That was definitely the biggest fish of the day. We went in for lunch. We're telling this story, and I can only hope that, the afternoon bite, the night bite is good. But of course, little do I know that I'm about to break my largemouth personal best as well. Twice. I did it twice within an hour. We get out on the boat. We go down to the rocks to one of our favorite spots. Throw in the same crawl and a jig. Boom. The same hit. My rod tanks down. I pull back on my hook set, and it's not going anywhere. I'm not moving this fish. I feel it slightly shaking, and I know that it's big. Get the net, Dad. Get the net. Boom. He pulls out the net, lands the fish, I believe it was a 5.2 or a 5.4 largemouth. The head on this thing was ridiculous. It was incredible to see. We're stoked out of our minds. Take a picture with it. Let it go. Thank you, fish. Thank you, universe. Thank you, fishing gods. Thank you, Vermont. Thank you, Champlain. We fish a little bit more. We don't catch anything. So then we go to this new spot across the way. We never really fished there before from what I could remember, but we knew it had fish. We find this little point with some trees and some rocks and some boulders. Casting my crawl out there. Boom. Rod goes down. Set the hook. Big. It's big, Dad. It's big. Get the net. Get the net. Same thing. I'm fighting this fish. What feels like forever. Get it to the boat. It's huge. Land it. I'm like, oh my God. It's another 5. It's another big one. It's another big one. We weigh it. It's 5 pounds, 12 ounces. I broke my personal best again. I think at the time, my personal best largemouth was probably around 3 pounds. And I did it within an hour. I break my personal best largemouth fishing one of my favorite ways, a crawl on the bottom, feeling that thump, cracking back on him, setting the hook. It's the most exciting feeling, fighting the fish, yet having him grab the net, land it, look at this thing, get it in your hands. It's the most exciting adrenaline rush like that you will get. I went from 3 pound personal best largemouth and smallmouth to a 4.12 and to a 5.12. To this day, 5 years later or something like that, I still have not broken that personal best. I have come close. Haven't broken it yet. Those moments are forever etched in my brain. That's the most exciting. I have it on camera, and just being able to go back and watch these moments and share these moments with my dad and forever have that as a memory, and to see how far I've come in fishing is just, it's a beautiful thing. And my passion for fishing has only ever grown from there. Now let's talk about kayak fishing. All this fishing that I've done previous has been from a boat, but kayak fishing is my favorite form of fishing. There's something about being in this small vessel, being able to get to places that other people can't get to, being on your own, being connected. You're lower to the water. You feel more connected with your surroundings. You're really tuned in to the sights and sounds and the things that are going on around you. And fighting a fish from the kayak, please. There is almost no better feeling or adrenaline rush than having a 5-pound bass swim at you, take your rod down. You have to pull your rod all the way around your boat. It's fighting you, and you're trying to grab a net, and you've got things tangled, and you land this fish, and it's sitting in your net in your lap, and your lap is soaked, and you've got this big old bass, and your kayak has been thrown around, and it's pulled you into a tree or into the lily pads, and everything's discombobulated, but at the same time, you're rewarded with this huge fish. Kayak fishing it's another beast in itself. But let me take you guys back to how I started. The one and only Chad Hoover of Kayak Bass Fishing TV, and his episode was on YouTube. First of all, his theme song, incredible. I love it so much. Second of all, fishing from the kayak. And I was just like, oh my God, yeah, people do this. And I know listening to this now, with the way the kayak fishing industry is and how incredible it is, and you've got pedal drives and motors and power poles and live scopes. Back then, it was a kayak, a milk crate, and a rod. You didn't even really have a net. It was the basics. Sometimes you didn't even have the milk crate. You just had a tray or two and some soft plastics. But ever since I saw that first video, I was addicted. I have watched every video of his since, some of them multiple times through. And then I just remember searching kayak fishing, kayak bass fishing. That's how I found the Lake Fork guy, Mr. Rackley. The first video I ever saw with him was of him and his buddy going to catch a Guadalupe bass for the first time in their Hobies. And it just went on from there. Nowadays, I follow people like Greg Blanchard or the Creek Crawler, Creek Fishing Adventures, ND Yak. We know he's incredible. A lot of people. I can't really, break it down into just a few guys. It's a lot. I am obsessed. I will watch anybody catch fish from a kayak. Mr. Robert Field, His episodes are incredible. Everything from saltwater to freshwater fishing, I'm all about it. I do not discriminate when it comes to species, and I do not discriminate, excuse me, with your methods, whether you're a bank fisherman, a kayak fisherman, boat, John boat, whatever. But kayak fishing, there's something about it that gets me going. When that early spring hits, I am itching to get out there, and I'm practically out there every day, if not every other day. So there's a lot of creators out there and anglers that I am inspired by. And when I started, I begged my parents for this kayak, okay? It was an Emotions Spitfire 9. To this day, I still own this kayak. It has become kind of a cadaver kayak. I don't use it anymore. This last year, I haven't used it, but it's a 9'8" kayak. It has a big old spot in the back for my crate. It's got just enough molded foot pedals in there for my feet, or foot stops for your feet. I would hold 3 rods or 4 rods with me at a time, and I had a little net. I customized the crap out of that kayak, okay? I had my little crate. I cut my crate at a certain angle so I could reach behind me. I had my net on this little hook, so I just had to reach and net my fish, and I had my little GoPro mount in the front. This thing was my favorite kayak. The only thing I didn't like about this kayak was that it didn't have adjustable foot stops. Sorry, right now I can't think of the name of them, but they were molded in foot stoppers, and I hated that. The only thing I wish is that we had adjustable foot pedals on there. Regardless, I used that kayak for 10 years, and I have been hooked ever since. My parents got me the kayak for Christmas. They surprised me because I begged for it. I opened every present. It wasn't there, obviously. I think you would notice this 10-foot kayak in your living room. After all the presents were done, they told me to go let the dog in, or let the dog go out and do her thing. And I go in the kitchen, and my kayak is on the kitchen table. Boom. Big, blue, beautiful kayak. And I remember, oh my God, you got me this kayak. I was freaking out. I was screaming and jumping and hugging, and I brought that thing in the living room, and I sat in it in my living room just thinking about all the possibilities. I was so happy. I had the biggest smile from ear to ear. And since then, I have a NuCanoe Frontier 10 right now that I'm actually selling in a few months, and I'm moving on to a Hoodoo Impulse 120. Either way, there's so many different kayaks that I would love to have in my arsenal. Kayak angling is where my heart is. That is my favorite. I cut my teeth bank fishing and kayak fishing and boat fishing a little bit, but if you asked me right now, like, if you wanted to go fishing, my kayak is already loaded on my car and ready to go. Excuse me for this last interruption. Again, this is where our sponsor ads will go when we have sponsors for this channel. As of right now, we are self-produced, but I do want to say, please like and subscribe and leave a good review on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. It really helps me reach a bigger audience. It helps the channel grow, and it lets that algorithm do its thing and get us out there. So again, I just want to say thank you, and please just take the time to go do that. It'll take about 15 seconds, 30 seconds, and it means the world to me. It's a small way that you guys can give back, and I really appreciate it. So I can talk kayak fishing all day long, but there's a few other hobbies of mine that I do want to talk about before this episode is over. Let's talk about hunting. I watched my grandfather and my dad and my cousins and my neighbor and my brother all hunt when I was little. The first hunt that I went on with my dad, I think he knew we weren't going to get a deer, but it was the most fun and one of the best memories I have growing up. There were these 2 apple trees in the middle of this field on this mountain that we would go to. And I remember getting my camo on, and all of the guys with my grandfather that were hanging out at the camper were like, "Oh yeah, good luck." And I remember painting my face and getting there, and when you're hunting, you have to whisper, gotta be quiet. I remember my dad telling me, "Okay, this is the part where we're gonna whisper. We're gonna keep our voices down because the deer have really good hearing, and we don't want to move real fast." and we're going to go to that tree over there, and we're going to sit down and we're going to set up. And I was like, okay, Dad, you got it. Every little step. I was walking nice and slow, trying not to step on any sticks. Every once in a while, we would stop. We would look at the tree line to see if we saw any deer. We would look at the grass line. We would look at the road line. Okay, we would keep going. We got up to this apple tree, and I remember my dad grabbing some apples off of the tree. And he'd be like, all right, we're going to smash these against the rocks so we get that apple scent in the air. Hopefully we can bring a deer in. I'm like, okay, Dad. I followed his lead. I would crush up the apples, and then we would sit and we would wait under this tree. And out of the woods come a mother deer and her baby doe. They run down to about 20 yards in front of us, and the baby starts eating the grass while the mom kind of looks around, sitting there not moving, breathing really heavy, but like trying to keep it quiet, looking at my dad without moving my head, looking at him, looking at the deer. And the mom looks down, and the baby looks up. She looks at us. The mom looks at us. The mom goes, snorts, and just, they take off back up the mountain. I'm like, whoa. Like, that was so exciting. I was like, oh my God, Dad, did you see that? And he was like, yeah, shh. I was like, that was so cool. That was the only thing we saw that night. Obviously, my dad couldn't shoot that deer. We were targeting a buck, and also it's illegal to take a mother with her baby. We get back, we get in the truck. I can't wait to go tell all my grandfather's friends about what we saw. And we get back and we're telling them, and they're like making it a big deal, like, oh, you're such a hot shot, and that's so cool, Janelle, you'll get one next time. And I went to sleep, and we wrapped it up and had no other luck that trip. But that was the first trip my dad ever took me on. And I didn't get my hunting license until about 2 years ago. But I have watched my dad and my neighbor and my brother, like I said, my cousins, all go hunting, and I've learned so much about it through them, and also through different, YouTube channels or TV shows. And getting out there for the first time and doing it was the most exciting feeling ever. The first deer I ever got was a doe, and my girlfriend at the time, now fiance, was with me in that deer stand, and she filmed the whole thing, and I got it on camera. I took this shot between two trees to take this doe. It was a perfect shot. And the adrenaline that courses through your veins is absolutely insane. And there's nothing like being 20 foot up in a tree in a stand, listening to the sounds of nature. It's quiet and peaceful, and at the same time, you can hear everything. You can hear the wind and the tree branches and the leaves. You can hear squirrels scattering around in the leaves, and you can see groundhogs and things eating acorns and corn or whatever bait you have out, and birds chirping and woodpeckers, and then you hear the deer come through the woods, and it's really cool. Nature in the wild is amazing, and it's, again, just, it's where I belong. I will explain more about my first hunt in another episode, but archery hunting, it's just got me hooked. I start practicing as soon as August hits, maybe a little bit before August, shooting my bow. I have a Bear Compound G2 Cruiser. It's an amazing bow. Love that thing to death. Got it dialed in at, I believe, like 47 pounds. Trying to bump it up a little bit this year. And sighting it in, my dad was helping me, and telling him the story and having my dad come help me track that deer, and my neighbor. It was just a huge moment, and I can't wait to get back in the stand and try to fill out a few more tags this season. The first time I went airsofting was with my cousin and all of his friends who were older than me. And I remember having a full paintball mask over my face, a baseball catcher's big padded chest plate. We were using these really crappy, inexpensive spring shotguns and things from Dick's Sporting Goods. And I remember being like 10 feet away from him, my cousin Josh. And he's shooting me with his gun in the chest, and I don't feel it, but I look, he's like, you're getting hit. I'm like, no, I'm not. I look down at my chest, and these BBs are hitting me in the chest and falling down. But I can't feel it because I'm wearing like an inch worth of catcher's padding equipment, and he's using a gun that's like barely shooting out a little plastic BB at me. I I kid you not. We didn't know what we were doing at the time. The next year, we start bumping it up, and a few people bought some guns from Evike. Now, these things were no joke. Once that transition happened, oh, we were getting into it. My brother had an M14 or an M16, one of the two. I bought an AK-47. He had a G36. And people were just, we were upgrading our gear and upgrading our loadouts, and we were playing game weekend after weekend after weekend for like the whole day on Saturdays and Sundays. And there's nothing like getting on the field and actually doing it. I'm not a video games kind of person. I'm a do it in person kind of person. And I have a fast, aggressive, wild kind of airsoft style where I want to bring the game to the opponent. I'm not one to sit around and wait for the action. I will bring the action to you. And that technique has made me pretty successful on the airsoft field. I'm not going to lie. I've had a really awesome melee kill. I've had some really cool long shot kills. I've had some really awesome teamwork wins and solo wins. And just the sport of airsoft has come so far, and it is one that I would love to get right back into. I haven't played in a year or so, but I do plan on getting back on the field and making it happen. It is one of the most exciting sports out there. Just the ability to customize loadouts and the different types of field play there are, from CQB to woodland to a combination, and all the different events that they have nowadays. It's an amazing sport, and I cannot wait to explore it more. Now, before I go, I just want to preface this episode by saying I am new to the podcast game. I'm used to creating YouTube content and videos, but this audio thing, it's a whole different ball game. So just be a little forgiving with me in the beginning as I get my bearings here. Again, if you guys wouldn't mind going on whatever platform you're on and liking this podcast and giving it a thumbs up and a good review, that really helps us grow this channel. So thank you guys for being here and listening, and I will see you guys in the next adventure on episode 2.